Meanwhile, a spokesman for Hamas released an audio statement last night to declare that they will broadcast the execution of one Israeli hostage for every time Israel targets civilians in their homes in Gaza without warning. With me to talk about the latest developments is founder of the New Culture Forum, Peter Whittle. Welcome, Peter. But first, let's cross over to our correspondent in Jerusalem, Gareth Brown, who joins us now. Gareth, first, if you can, tell us more about this threat from Hamas, a chilling threat that they will execute one hostage for every air raid by Israel that they do not get warned about. Well, that is horrific, isn't it? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, it's a chilling threat. I mean, we've not seen any evidence that they've started doing that or they are actually going to do that. So far, it's just words, thankfully. But what I would say is that that would be a massive escalation, even from Hamas's point of view, to start doing that. And for sure, it would invite this huge response from Israel and from the international community.
Indeed, but when you say, will Hamas go through with this? I mean, we've already seen on Saturday and over the weekend, I mean, they're prepared to commit any atrocity. So doubting whether or not they'll go through with this threat to execute hostages may be a feat of optimism, really.
Yeah. I mean, that's a fair point. I guess the point would be, it seems to me at this point that Hamas is kind of all in on this war. I suspect that they are anticipating now an Israeli ground invasion. There's going to be, well, there's already been quite a sustained air campaign on Gaza from the Israeli Air Force. The fact is we do see groups like Hamas make these threats from time to time, and sometimes they follow through on these atrocities. Sometimes they don't. They'll be judged by their actions, and if they do that, it will be met with a very, very strong response by the Israelis. Absolutely.
Now, we know that over the weekend, particularly on Saturday, that Israelis were somewhat furious with the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for not knowing about this, for the failure in intelligence. Usually Israel and Mossad, greatest intelligence service on the face of the earth. Somehow or other, on the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War in 1973, Israel had no idea about this. So Netanyahu catching a lot of flack from Israeli people over the weekend, but his response is swift, severe and ruthless. Is the mood changing towards Netanyahu among the Israeli people? Are they beginning to say this is a leader of power who will steer us through this crisis, or are they still furious with him for letting it happen in the first place?
No, I don't think they're coming in behind the Prime Minister just yet. I mean, as you say, it's really incredible that the Israeli security forces, the security establishment, didn't see this coming. I spent a lot of time in Gaza, and we were always under the belief that Israel really knows everything going on in that tiny little enclave. I think there's this talk of a unity government. I mean, whilst this war is going on, I think Netanyahu essentially gets a reprieve. It's a rally around the flag sort of mentality. I don't think anyone would want to be seen attempting to topple a prime minister when the country is at war. But this war will eventually end. And then afterwards, there's going to be some real deep searching questions about Netanyahu, his capacity to govern and rule. And, he's always been Mr. Security. That was his thing. I'm the guy that is going to keep Israel safe. And that's obviously under question after the events of the last few days. So, I mean, we have to wait and see how things unfold. But frankly, it's hard to see there not being serious repercussions for Netanyahu when this campaign that Israel is, appears to be about to launch into Gaza finishes. Now, that could be weeks or months away. There's a lot that can change in that time. And you can't underestimate that the force of a war on how that can change the national conversation. But I don't think the dust has really settled from Saturday's attack. The blood hasn't really dried. We're seeing skirmishes on the northern border with Lebanon, with Hezbollah. But I don't think it's fair to say that Netanyahu has his failings have been forgotten. People are still They have deep questions about his governance. And that's not just related to this. You know, we've seen these protests every Saturday night in Israel since the start of the year, since he took office, over this controversial, judicial reform plan that he's been pushing through the parliament here. So for now, as long as the war goes on, he's safe. But I think as soon as the war stops, there's going to be some jockeying.
Yeah, and it's incumbent upon Netanyahu to mount an extremely severe response. He already is, quite clearly. We're hearing that within 2 days, Israeli soldiers may invade over land. They have 173 fully paid up soldiers, 300,000 reserve soldiers. I mean, Israeli military might is awesome. And you have to fear for Gaza. I mean, my feeling is he's going to flatten the place, isn't he?
Yeah, that would be my prediction too. I mean, you have to think, look, Israel has fought 5 wars in Gaza in the last 15 years, and they haven't succeeded in wiping out Hamas. You know, Hamas is as strong now as it's ever been. He can go in. I mean, I'm already, speaking to people in Gaza. There's already reports of buildings being leveled, UN buildings being hit, schools being hit, lots of civilian casualties. Okay, that can increase, things can get a lot worse. But, if we end up in this conflict where there's this mass loss of life in Gaza, infrastructure is damaged, life in that area is dire. It's really hard already. I mean, and if it gets substantially worse in the coming weeks, you have to wonder what the end game is there. A lot of people in Israel are saying this is our 9/11. And I think when I think about 9/11, as much as we think about the atrocity that happened that day, we also heavily associate it with the response of Western governments, which was, I mean, I think you could describe as cack-handed, and it was devastating for many, many people around the world. So that's the question here. Okay, he flattens Gaza, then what? If you get rid of Hamas, who takes over in Gaza? I mean, it doesn't look like the Palestinian Authority would be capable of governing there. Does Israel want to reoccupy Gaza with ground forces having to patrol the streets? I don't think they have the stomach for that. So there's a lot of what happens next if he does. Okay, in the short term, it might give some sort of some sense of justice to the Israelis if they can mount this really strong campaign. But how is that going to improve the general situation? I'm not sure I've seen an answer to that question yet.
Gareth, great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. That's Gareth Brown, journalist there in Jerusalem.